Good morning. I am Chirag Bapat, a fourth year undergraduate student at RV College of Engineering in Bangalore, India. I am here today to explain to you my results and observations on a comparative study conducted between HPCC Systems and Hadoop by my teammate and myself. Now, this study was conducted on more practical comparisons, as this is geared towards developers who are planning on choosing between either of these platforms for their next big data analytics project. So we shall be assessing both the similarities and differences between the two setups, which will assist the end user or the client to make a better choice and more informed choice between the two platforms. Now, what parameters are we choosing to compare here? Well, we shall be comparing the time required and the effort required to set up one or more clusters of each platform, then the documentation and support which is provided by both the providers of the software and the community, the ease of programming with respect to both of these systems, and then of course a performance and a load test for by running various machine learning algorithms on each system or with different size data sets. Now, firstly, to set up the clusters, we shall be considering a Dockerized setup. Since we could not access physical machines due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we shall be considering Dockerized setups of each system. So every system will have one main node, which will be the single node cluster that we'll be setting up for both HPCC and Hadoop. Then we shall scale both these clusters up to multi-node clusters and see how the performance varies. Here we shall be comparing how easy it is to set these clusters up and how easy it is to configure these clusters up. Next, we'll be comparing the documentation and support provided by each platform. So how we do this is, we look at the number of forums, the quality of forums that exist provided both by the community as well as the original providers of the software. Secondly, we plan to look at some simple issues that a beginner developer might have, and look to see if we can find these solutions much faster in either of these two scenarios. Thirdly, the ease of programming. Now, ease of programming is a very subjective term, and how we plan to make this objective is by just comparing two factors. The various language constructs involved in either the programming languages which are required to program for HPCC as well as for Hadoop. Secondly, we would be looking at the performance based on the number of lines of code and the amount of and the quality of the code that was written. Finally, we will be performing a performance test and a load test based on the machine learning algorithms, which would be regression and classification algorithms, and we'll be comparing them based on two different sized data sets to perform a load test as well. Now, upon setting up our HPCC and Hadoop clusters, we found out that it is much easier to set up an HPCC cluster, a single node cluster, or a multi-node cluster than a Hadoop cluster. This is because of the reduced number of dependencies that are, or reduced number of prerequisites that exist. So if you want to install a HPCC cluster, all you need to do is install client tools on a machine and you're done. But if you require to install a Hadoop cluster, you need a compatible version of Java, you need to set up SSH properly, and then you need to install Hadoop as well as an analysis engine, as Hadoop is not enough. But HPCC provides an analysis engine inbuilt. So what we see here is that it is much easier to set up and configure a HPCC cluster than a Hadoop cluster. It takes lesser time because you would have to put in lesser effort as well. Next, the documentation and support. Now, since HPCC is a relatively recent introduction into the big data analytics space, since as we can see the first release is in 2011 as compared to Hadoop, whose first release was back in 2006. So we can obviously expect some lack of documentation on the side of HPCC with respect to Hadoop, and some lack of support as well. But there is a significant shortage of HPCC support on online forums, which are handled by the community. So the community support for HPCC is smaller as compared to the Hadoop support. However, the developers of the softwares themselves have adequate amounts of documentation and guides on their respective websites. Thirdly, the ease of programming. Now, for Hadoop, it is easier to program in Hadoop for Hadoop systems than it is for HPCC systems. This is because Hadoop offers you a variety of programming languages that you can program in, and these are all common programming languages. like Python, Java, Scala, etc. Now, these programming languages are easier for users to pick up as they have common programming constructs such as loops and conditional statements, etc. But HPCC systems requires an entirely different language called ECL, which does not have these specific language constructs involved. So to make any sort of conditional or a loop, there would be a different combination of constructs that you would need to use, and this might take a little bit of time and effort on the developer side to learn entirely new language and develop a project, an application based on that language. So in that sense, it is much simpler to program for Hadoop based applications than it is for HPCC based applications. However, the constructs that exist in ECL for big data, for any sort of analysis of data, are much more geared towards that specific application. So it is, as we see in Python is a generic language, which means that it has generic constructs which are not exactly geared towards performing any data analysis. So in that sense, it is it is simpler to program in ECL once you've gotten the hang of it, but learning ECL will take some amount of time. Fourth and the final result that we will be demonstrating here is a performance test. So this is a clear differentiator between HPCC and Hadoop based on the performance, where HPCC systems performs much better with respect to the time required to process the data and to deliver a result to us. So we have implemented 2 regression and 2 classification algorithms. The regression algorithms implemented were linear regression and a random forest regression algorithm. Similarly, for classification algorithms, we have implemented a logistic regression algorithm as well as a random forest classifications algorithm on 2 different size data sets. One data set has a size of about 1200 data points, whereas the other data set has a data size. The number of data points in that data set is around a million. So as we see, there's a huge difference in the size of the data sets, and when we implement these algorithms on both these systems, the smaller data set required has had a comparison of about 3x, had a reduced time of about 3x, and for the largest data set we saw a reduced time of about 1.75x for between HPCC systems and Hadoop. This clearly shows that HPCC systems performs much better and especially under a heavy load of a heavier data set. So in conclusion, what we see here is that all of these parameters that we have analyzed are not very objective parameters that can be easily measured in quantity. We'll have to look at user experience in most of these parameters. But if we need to choose between HPCC and Hadoop systems, these practical aspects also need to be considered. And so, for example, if a developer needs to set up a project immediately, Hadoop might be a better choice, as that would not entail the developer learning an entirely new language. But if a project needs to be set up for a long-term performance-based criterion, then at that point we would prefer to use HPCC, as it is a more appropriate performance platform for the same. So a combination of all these factors should help developers in choosing the right platform for their specific requirements, both long-term and short-term. Thank you.